Happy Saturday, and thank you for joining me today. All right, we're going to begin tonight in the 1990s. It was a prosperous and also dark decade. Christina Aguilera was topping the charts with her new song, Genie in a Bottle. Fast food became popular, and classic Disney films like The Lion King and Toy Story were released. Cell phones got smaller, were to the point you could actually fit them into your pocket. And there was also the rise of the internet.
Tonight, the information superhighway and one of its main thoroughfares, an online network called Internet.
What do President Clinton, conservative radio personality Rush Limbaugh, and rock star Billy Idol have in common? They've all got electronic mail addresses on computer systems linked to the Internet, a global hookup that permits computers to exchange information. In 1981, only 213 computers were hooked to the Internet. As the new year begins, an estimated 2.5 million computers will be on the network, serving as many as 20 million people. Almost 2001, and the technologies that bring us telephones, TV, and computers are merging.
5 years from now, we're not going to have distinct cable and telephone industries. There's going to be one industry, and there'll be companies carrying bits, little pieces of information from point A to point B.
Give me the University Research Network.
A promotional video put out 5 years ago by Apple Computer envisioned people talking to computer terminals and to one another through video phone links by the year 2010.
Hi, Mike. What's up?
It's already coming true. In Cerritos, California, video phone service is part of an experiment started by General Telephone and the local cable company. There are also interactive TV channels where people order movies on demand instead of driving to the local video store. High schoolers can get practice questions for the Scholastic Aptitude Test. These new services add about $10 a month to the average cable TV bill. George Lewis, NBC News, Los Angeles.
For any of our viewers who have access to Internet, we invite your comments. The address for NBC Nightly News on Internet is nightly@nbc.com. No spaces.
That was reporting from NBC News in 1993 about the rise of the internet and a new form of communication called email, and the very few people who had it at the time. And for the most part, foreign relations in the 1990s was pretty calm, especially when it came to Russia. Back then, Russia and the United States had what would be described as a honeymoon relationship, I guess you could say. In the summer of 1999, when Bill Clinton was president, Russia had what was about, essentially, an economic crisis. Russian President Boris Yeltsin named this obscure former KGB agent and security chief to be his acting prime minister and stated that he wanted this new guy to succeed him as president. Well, that new guy was Vladimir Putin. And in the following week, apartment bombings killed more than 300 people across Russia. Acting Prime Minister Vladimir Putin acted vociferously and blamed the attacks on Chechen terrorists. Apparently, the response boosted his popularity, although some question his judgment on blaming the Chechen terrorists for those bombings. Then on December 31st, 1999, Boris Yeltsin resigned as president of Russia and named Vladimir Putin as acting president of the country. On March 26, 2000, Vladimir Putin won his first presidential election, and after the 9/11 terrorist attacks here in the United States, Putin was one of the first to call then-President George W. Bush and offer his sympathy. And he didn't just express sympathy in his words, he also expressed that with his actions. He assisted in Afghanistan with fighting the Taliban, and he permitted the United States to establish a conspicuous military presence in Central Asia. So things were going well. Until, of course, the conflict arrived. In 2003, Putin was diametrically opposed to the invasion of Iraq and was enraged when the U.S. left an arms treaty while encouraging Russia to bolster its nuclear capabilities as well. He was also was not so excited when NATO expanded to Russian borders, so the honeymoon didn't last very long. Nevertheless, in 2004, Putin won re-election, and 4 years later, he couldn't run again because of Russia's constitutional limits, which prevented anyone from serving more than 2 consecutive terms. So, Putin became the prime minister after his ally, Dmitry Medvedev, became president. 2 years later, in 2006, Russian investigative journalist Anna Politkovskaya, a known critic of human rights abuses in Chechnya, was murdered on Putin's birthday. This was reporting from CBC News at the time.
Well, today, people came to celebrate a hero and mourn the murder of a journalist, a woman who reported about Russian abductions and torture in Chechnya. A gunman shot her dead on Saturday. The CBC's Nick Spicer was at the funeral that attracted journalists, diplomats, and more than 1,000 other Russians.
Hundreds waited for hours in the cold rain in silence. They came to pay their respects to her, Anna Politkovskaya, a journalist respected around the world for her courageous, often indignant dispatches from the bloody, sometimes forgotten war in Chechnya. Scores of journalists came to grieve the woman and to mark what's seen as yet another blow to journalistic freedom. Russia is considered the third most dangerous country for the media after Iraq and Algeria. I don't see who can replace her, says this radio station manager, and all the other reporters are afraid now. Over the years, Politkovskaya's writing about the Chechen war was both factual and angry. She accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of using the conflict to build his career and to turn back the democratic clock in Russia. Politkovskaya always preferred covering the fighting from the front lines with the people under fire instead of with the generals ordering the next artillery barrage. So it was fitting, perhaps, that today the people turned up. Anna was a genuine citizen of Russia, says this woman, and Russia should honor her. But official Russia did not honor Anna Politkovskaya. There was no one from the Kremlin or government at her funeral. President Putin said nothing about the murder for 2 whole days. And then it was only during a phone conversation with American President George Bush that he saluted the journalist's courage and promised a complete investigation. But very few people here believe that that will produce a killer. Nick Spicer, CBC News, Moscow.
That was reporting from CBC News in 2006 about the death of this Russian journalist. 10 years later, the Washington Post did a write-up on Anna Politkovskaya. Quote, Politkovskaya repeatedly received death threats as a result of her reporting. She was threatened with rape and was subjected to a mock execution after being arrested by the Russian military. In 2004, while traveling to the North Ossetian town of Beslan in the hope of trying to mediate the school hostage crisis, she was poisoned and nearly died. After the Beslan poisoning, Politkovskaya wrote, quote, we are hurtling back into a Soviet abyss, into an information vacuum that spells death from our own ignorance. She thought that by reporting the truth and standing up to terror, she might be able to prevent Russia from becoming a danger to itself and to the world. She survived until she came up against Ramzan Kadyrov, who was the Chechen warlord who was installed by Putin to run the republic with iron-fisted impunity. The relationship between Putin and Kadyrov is notoriously close. Putin has said that the Chechen is like a son to him, while Kadyrov has professed his great love for Putin, saying that those who criticize Putin are not human, they are my personal enemies. Well, the Russian journalist was such an enemy. When she interviewed Kadyrov in 2004, he angrily said, "You have come between Chechens. You are an enemy." Being called an enemy by Kadyrov was the equivalent of a death sentence. But she didn't back down. On October 5th, 2006, she gave an interview to Radio Liberty in which she said that Kadyrov was a coward armed to the teeth and the Stalin of our days. End quote. She also said that her objective was to make sure that a criminal case was opened against him. The article she was working on that time, which turned out to be her last investigative report, documented the torture and killing of 2 people by a law enforcement body controlled by Kadyrov. Of course, this Russian journalist was murdered 2 days later in a contract-style killing, her body dumped in the elevator by her apartment along with the pistol used to kill her. It was October 7th, which just happened to be Putin's 54th birthday. End quote. That same year, Kremlin critic Alexander Litvinenko died in London after being poisoned with a radioactive substance. Years later, a British inquiry discovered that he was murdered by Russian spies. In 2012, Putin got reelected with over 60% of the vote after they changed the presidential term in Russia from 4 years to 6 years. Upon receiving that news, large anti-Putin demonstrations transpired in Russia, with critics alleging voter fraud. Then in 2014, after Ukraine's powerful pro-democracy uprising to become a Western-facing nation integrated with Europe, Russia annexed Crimea. And Russia annexing Crimea, that was a very, very scary thing. I mean, no such thing had happened like this, like since literally World War II, when Hitler decided to start taking over countries. So this was an astonishing thing. It was also intimidating. And that especially didn't sit well with U.S. President Barack Obama.
The proposed referendum on the future of Crimea would violate the Ukrainian Constitution and violate international law. Any discussion about the future of Ukraine must include the legitimate government of Ukraine. In 2014, we are well beyond the days when borders can be redrawn over the heads of democratic leaders. This morning, I signed an executive order that authorizes sanctions on individuals and entities responsible for violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, or for stealing the assets of the Ukrainian people. According to my guidance, the State Department has also put in place restrictions on the travel of certain individuals and officials. These decisions continue our efforts to impose a cost on Russia and those responsible for the situation in Crimea. While we take these steps, I want to be clear that there is also a way to resolve this crisis that respects the interests of the Russian Federation, as well as the Ukrainian people. Let international monitors into all of Ukraine, including Crimea, to ensure the rights of all Ukrainians are being respected, including ethnic Russians. Begin consultations between the government of Russia and Ukraine with the participation of the international community. Russia would maintain its basing rights in Crimea, provided that it abides by its agreements and respects Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And the world should support the people of Ukraine as they move to elections in May. That's the path of de-escalation. And Secretary Kerry is engaged in discussions with all of the relevant parties, including Russia and Ukraine, to pursue that path. If this violation of international law continues, the resolve of the United States and our allies and the international community will remain firm. Meanwhile, we've taken steps to reaffirm our commitment to the security and democracy of our allies in Eastern Europe and to support the people of Ukraine.
In 2016, Donald Trump was elected President of the United States and sworn in on January 20th, 2017. Donald Trump, of course, downplayed the 2016 Russian DNC hacking and undermined our intelligence community's unanimous assessment that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential elections to bolster the chances of he and denigrate Hillary Clinton. In 2018, former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter were poisoned in London with a nerve agent. They did survive, but a woman ultimately died. Then on March 19th, 2018, Putin got reelected president in Russia by a landslide, allowing him to stay in office until 2024. Of course, earlier this summer, that changed because a new rule that now permits Putin to stay in office until 2036. There is a broad history when it comes to Russian aggression and vehemently denouncing it. Of course, our current president has failed on multiple occasions to do so. And as I said last year about this new Pentagon report, that may have some geopolitical ramifications for us, for our nation, for our democratic republic. This is concerning. This is from that 2019 Pentagon report called Russian Strategic Intentions. This is from that white paper. Quote, "While the United States focused on executing global war on terror, Russia actively pursued malign influence in all regions of the world to mitigate their inferior conventional capability. Russia has a growing and demonstrated capacity and willingness to exercise malign influence in Europe and abroad, including in the United States. countering Russian gray zone efforts are not specific to the U.S. Defense Department, are not specific to just the U.S. Defense Department, but must be part of a whole of a U.S. government effort that leverages all elements of national power. Russia's gray zone tactics are most effective when the target is deeply polarized or lacks the capacity to resist and respond effectively to Russian aggression. Conversely, countries that are resilient against attempts to divide their populace are to apply economic coercion and to wield proxy forces. Those entities can better handle sub-conventional threats from Russia. End quote. So once again, that was reporting from this Pentagon report, at least in 2019, about Russian strategic intentions. Well, in 2016, right after the Russians hacked the Democratic National Committee, what did President Barack Obama do? Well, he applied economic coercion. He essentially issued sanctions on Russia for what they did. Also, when reports of interference in the 2016 presidential elections came up, what President Obama do? He applied sanctions. We have not been seeing this stuff under the Trump administration. And it's unsettling because if you go back into the report, it lists this: the countries that will have a problem with Russia is those who are, quote, deeply polarized and lack the capacity to resist and respond effectively to Russian aggression, end quote. Well, what has just happened after the Russian cyber attack on the United States? The president downplayed it, right? He said maybe it was some other country like China, perhaps. Subsequently, the United States intelligence community denied that assertion and said that the cyber attack was likely Russian-oriented. Then last week, after continuing to downplay the cyber attack, the Trump administration finally said, okay, it was Russia. And as far as the latest companies hacked by Russia, we can now add Microsoft to that list. On Christmas Eve, Ellen Nakashima at the Washington Post reported, quote, Russian government hackers have compromised Microsoft Cloud customers and stolen emails from at least one private sector company, according to people familiar with the matter. A worrying development in Moscow's ongoing cyber espionage campaign targeting numerous U.S. agencies and corporate computer networks. The intrusions appear to have occurred via a Microsoft corporate partner that handles cloud access services. Those familiar with the matter said. They do not identify the partner or the company known to have had emails stolen. Like others, these people spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss what remains a highly sensitive subject, end quote. Earlier this year, Microsoft's president described the Russian cyber attack as a, quote, moment of reckoning, end quote. There's also some other news related to Russia that is not being widely reported, but is worth mentioning here. If you recall, back in August, Putin critic Alexei Navalny was poisoned, and he said that he believes it was Russia that poisoned him. In November of 2020, Navalny spoke on 60 Minutes about returning to Russia and what that could be like. This was that interview.
3 years ago, when I did my first story on you, when we took our train trip together, I asked you something, and I'm going to read it to you and ask you if you feel the same. So I said, is it, in your mind, worth your life? Because there is a big target on you, no question.
I'm trying to not to think about it because, look, I think I'm ready to sacrifice everything for my job and for the people who are surrounding me. I'm not let them down. And I'm trying to not to reflect about it all the time.
You feel the same?
I feel even more, and I feel that they try to make this attempt. And now from my experience, it's not a theoretical for me, that if they will try to kill me, do I feel some fear? Will I abandon my job because they try to kill me? Now, from my experience, personal experience, I just now know I don't feel any fear, and I'm ready to continue to work. So it's on the practical way. I just know it's something about me.
You have actually said, my job now is not to be afraid.
Right?
It's your job.
It is my job because people are watching. And everyone asking me this question, are you afraid? Are you going to come back to Russia? And my job is to not be afraid and go back to Russia. I can see that Kremlin right now, they do everything to prevent me being back to Moscow, but it's never going to happen.
In that same interview, Alexei Navalny calls on President Trump himself to directly condemn that the poisoning of this Russian ally, of this Putin critic. But apparently President Trump did not do it. There was reporting in September of 2020 that the Trump administration had denounced the poisoning of this Russian opposition leader. According to the Washington Post, quote, the White House on Thursday denounced the poisoning of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny and suggested that the United States might retaliate if the Kremlin is to blame, but President Trump has not repudiated the attack himself, prompting criticism that he is being once again too soft on President Vladimir Putin, end quote. And in that same interview, Mr. Navalny was not joking when he talked about returning to Russia. He's apparently doing it despite threats of arresting him. We'll get to that news in a moment. But yesterday, one of Navalny's allies was arrested over charges of inciting extremism online. The Hill reports, quote, Pavel Zelensky, a member of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, was ordered to be jailed by the Presnevsky District Court a day before Navalny is expected to return to Russia after he was poisoned in August and fled to Germany for treatment. The court said in a statement to Reuters that Zelensky was jailed and his detention was confirmed by Ivan Zdinev, director of the Anti-Corruption Foundation. Quote, we will not give up and we will not give up and will help Pasha Zelensky's family in every way possible, according to the director of the Anti-Corruption Foundation. The Anti-Corruption Foundation, a leading opposition group in Moscow, works to investigate government graft. Zelensky's case reportedly revolves around a picture he tweeted of Irina Slavina, a Russian journalist who set herself on fire in front of the Interior Ministry after police searched her apartment. Zelensky urged protesters to take to the streets after her death. End quote. According to Bellingcat, a prominent investigative journalism website, a poison squad stalked Alexei Navalny on 40 different flights. The reporting is just absolutely astonishing. I'll make sure to link that in the description of this episode, the write-up from The Guardian in the description. On the news of Navalny returning to Russia himself, here's reporting from Isabel Khurshudin at the Washington Post. Isabel Khurshudin, quote, 5 months after a near fatal poisoning, Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny said he plans to return to Russia on Sunday, setting up another expected showdown between Navalny's supporters and the Kremlin. Russian authorities announced that Navalny is on a wanted list for allegedly violating the terms of his suspended sentence from a 2014 embezzlement conviction, which Navalny in the European Court of Human Rights has called a political prosecution. Russia's prisons service said that it has, quote, an order to take measures to arrest him when establishing his whereabouts. That means he could be detained immediately from his return from Berlin, where he has been recovering from a nerve agent poisoning during a trip to Siberia in August. Navalny and his supporters say the attack was ordered by President Vladimir Putin, charges the Kremlin denies. End quote. Yesterday, the Reuters newspaper reported Berlin is now handing over transcripts to Russia for an investigation into the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. Quote, Germany has given transcripts of interviews with Alexei Navalny to Russia as part of Moscow's probe into the poisoning of the Kremlin critic. A Justice Ministry spokesman said, demanding a thorough investigation into the crime. The ministry said Russia now had all the information needed to carry out a criminal investigation into Navalny's poisoning in August last year, including blood and tissue samples. Quote, the German government assumes that the Russian government will now immediately take all necessary steps to clarify the crime against Mr. Navalny. End quote. The crime must be solved in Russia. This requires investigations commensurate with the seriousness of this crime. The German ministry, the German Justice Ministry said Navalny was interviewed by Berlin prosecutors and provided extensive answers to questions submitted by Russia's General Prosecutor's Office. End quote. We will continue to keep an eye on both of these stories as we head into this new week. But there is one more point I want to make, essentially, before we go to commercial break here. In that 2019 Pentagon report, it states that countries that will have the most problems when it comes to Russia are those who are, quote, deeply polarized and lack the capacity to resist and respond effectively to Russian aggression, end quote. That has unfortunately been our response on many things in response to Russian aggression, because President Trump has refused on multiple occasions to condemn it. Well, in 3 days, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th president of the United States. And based on his recent statements in regard to Russia, we can expect that maybe he will be more serious and direct when it comes to Russian aggression. More to come tonight. Stay with us.
At a time when we're asked to sacrifice, we step up to do our part. On the home front, on the front lines, to lend a helping hand and hold each other up. We are resilient, vigilant, and we'll get through this because we're better together, even if we're a little farther apart.
Welcome back. So we had expected this news to come in at any moment, and apparently has arrived. The breaking news right now is that Alexei Navalny has just arrived in Russia and was arrested immediately. According to the New York Times, the police has also arrested some of his supporters who showed up at the airport to greet him. Videos show him hugging his wife before he was taken away. Mr. Navalny's spokeswoman released a statement on Twitter saying, quote, writing, quote, Alexei has been taken away by police officers at the border without any explanation why. They did not let his lawyer accompany him because she had crossed the border a second earlier, end quote. Reportedly, before Mr. Navalny was taken away at passport control, he gave an impromptu statement to journalists saying, quote, I am not afraid. I know that I am right. I know all the criminal cases against me are fabricated. End quote. As I said in the opening introduction there, the criminal charges against Mr. Navalny are ludicrous. That, of course, was so that Navalny couldn't run against Putin in Russia's 2018 presidential election, being that Navalny was a real prominent figure in Russian politics at the time. But he has been a critic of Putin for a while, exposing Russian corruption with awesome YouTube videos of drones flying over Putin's allies' houses and everything. It's just incredible. And Alexei Navalny has also built a nationwide campaign of supporters. One of Navalny's main associates, Leonid Volkov, said before he was arrested, quote, if Putin decided to arrest him on arrival, he'll certainly become the world's political prisoner number one, as with Nelson Mandela. The second alternative for Putin isn't any better. Leaving Navalny free would mean showing weakness in the eyes of his inner circle, end quote. Of course, Mr. Navalny has been through a lot. He lost his friend Boris Nemtsev on February 27th, 2015, when he was crossing a bridge with his girlfriend and then shot several times from behind. Boris Nemtsev's girlfriend survived but was the only eyewitness to the assassination. Mr. Nemtsev was a known Putin critic, and Navalny was one of the two friends to survive in that friendship. Also, in December of last year, it was widely reported that Navalny got a Russian agent to confess to the plot to poison him on a phone call. That video was then subsequently uploaded to YouTube, which has been viewed more than 40 million times. Once again, Alexei Navalny has been detained after returning to Russia. He is a known Putin critic. We'll continue to keep an eye on this story. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Oh, I wanted to ask you, Liz and I are going to do some work around the house. Do you know any good contractors?
I might.
Oh, that's great. Can you check their qualifications? Make sure they have great reviews and research the average price for the job. Oh, and book them on Wednesday. Actually, make it Friday. When the water.
You can't expect your neighbors to do everything HomeAdvisor can. So for a better way to get home projects done right, just ask HomeAdvisor.
Welcome back. This was reporting from the Al Jazeera YouTube channel last Wednesday on the coronavirus situation here in the United States.
At one of Los Angeles' largest hospitals, COVID-19 patients are packed 4 to a room with only one nurse to care for them. Waiting rooms have become treatment centers. Nearby, multiple hospital staff reposition patients so they can pull enough oxygen into their lungs. It's likely to get worse.
We're going to see another huge surge upon surge. It'll happen in the next 7 to 10 days. Some are describing it as a viral tsunami.
Across the U.S., more than 100,000 people have been hospitalized with COVID for the past 40 days in a row. Across the country, mass vaccination centers are being set up, including at Disneyland and Dodger Stadium in Southern California, at a sports complex near Fort Worth, Texas, and a football stadium outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
July plans to start out doing 300 vaccines per day, but is going to build up to administering 5,000 vaccines per day.
So far, the vaccination program has been slower than expected and with no nationwide plan in place, often haphazard. Early Tuesday morning in North Carolina, hundreds of elderly people waited for hours at a drive-through vaccination center, but many of them were turned away when supplies ran out. The Trump administration announced on Tuesday it would no longer hold back millions of vaccine doses it had been reserving for second shots.
Every vaccine dose that is sitting in a warehouse rather than going into an arm could mean one more life lost or one more hospital bed occupied.
The about-face came days after President-elect Joe Biden said he would do the same thing once he takes office.
Once again, that was reporting from Al Jazeera, the YouTube channel, sort of providing updated reporting on that. To give you an update on the U.S. coronavirus death toll, we have now reached more than 397,000 coronavirus deaths here in the United States, with more than 23 million coronavirus cases. Here in South Carolina, we have just surpassed 350,000 coronavirus cases and 5,000 deaths. Gregory Yee reported at the Post and Courier on Friday that SC hospitals are now requesting for extra doses of the coronavirus vaccine, but they are not coming. South Carolina Republican Senator Tom Davis said that he was enraged by this news and reportedly said DHEC officials assured him during a Tuesday committee meeting that the vaccine rollout would not be a problem. He said, quote, "Frustration doesn't begin to describe this. To have this sense of anger and frustration is palpable," end quote. According to Mr. Yee's reporting at the Post and Courier, the state Republican Senator Tom Davis, said he is unsure about what the next steps are, but believes that there needs to be better communication between DHEC and hospitals on how many vaccine doses we can expect. Reportedly, South Carolina is one of the worst in the nation when it comes to vaccine distribution. This was news reporting from News 2 here in South Carolina yesterday.
And despite that drop in dose numbers, state health officials scrambling to find ways to administer vaccines to hundreds of thousands of people across the state. They say the demand is high and they're struggling to keep up. This is Katie Turner, heard from doctors. She joins us live. Katie, new research showing South Carolina one of the worst states when it comes to getting vaccines out.
Yeah, Brendan, in fact, the latest data ranks South Carolina as 48 out of all 50 states in vaccine administration. State health officials say they are doing everything they can to speed up the process, but right now, managing demand is their biggest challenge. A slow and steady vaccine rollout has South Carolina among the bottom spot in the nation.
We are certainly doing our best to try to vaccinate as many as possible.
Pressure is rising to get hundreds of thousands of shots into the arms of South Carolinians.
There are two constraints. One is, how much vaccine do we have? And the second is, how many team members do we have to do the vaccination?
DHEC officials say they are aware of the state's ranking, but are unsure of the accuracy.
We are in communication with the CDC and Operation Warp Speed to verify that information, that data and those numbers are correct.
Amid rumors of wasted vials of the vaccine, state health leaders say they are administering nearly 100% of the allocated doses from the federal government.
Not seeing any significant numbers of doses being discarded or wasted.
Health leaders across the state stepping up their vaccination efforts, making sure those without internet or residents of rural areas get their doses.
The FQHCs, many of which are in rural areas, will receive vaccine beginning the start of this coming week.
Doctors at the Medical University of South Carolina say they're vaccinating about 3,000 to 4,000 people per day.
Our goal is to get to 10,000 vaccines a day, assuming the vaccine supply allows for that.
In the meantime, those waiting for their turn can help keep hospital beds open.
It's going to depend on everyone's behavior in South Carolina, and we really need everybody. This is a critical point in time. We need everybody to double down on their efforts.
DHEC says the state is moving towards the start of Phase 1B, which would open up vaccinations for school workers and more first responders. Next Wednesday, Federal Healthcare is opening a vaccine clinic offering first-come, first-served vaccines to people in Phase 1A, including healthcare workers and people in long-term care facilities. We have more details over on counton2.com. For now in studio, I'm Katie Turner. Count on 2.
Yesterday, thestate.com reported that hundreds of people received the coronavirus vaccine at a double-secret vaccination clinic at state fairgrounds. This is reporting from thestate.com. Quote, hundreds get COVID vaccine at double-secret vaccination clinic at state fairgrounds. The reporting continues. Quote, South Carolina's health department held an unpublicized mass vaccination clinic Friday at the state fairgrounds in Columbia that drew hundreds of people who waited in their cars for hours to secure doses of the scarce COVID-19 vaccine. Quote, we heard about it this morning when a friend texted us. To say that she had heard that DHEC was running the vaccination program at the state fairgrounds for people over 70, said one person. A spokeswoman for the State Department of Health and Environment Control, which did not promote the clinic, confirmed late Friday that the state agency had held a drive-through vaccination event at the state fairgrounds on Friday. A spokeswoman for DHEC, Laura Renwick, initially said that the event was not open to the public and was intended for pre-scheduled first responders, but later clarified that some people without appointments received vaccinations. DHEC ended up vaccinating approximately 600 people, according to the clinic Friday, she said. Bender, who described the event as the state's health agency's double-secret vaccination program, said he and his wife and a neighbor hopped in his truck Friday and drove over to the state fairgrounds after hearing about the clinic. He and his wife had been scheduled to get the first doses in early February in the Charleston area, but jumped at the opportunity to get vaccinated closer to home Friday. They waited in line for about 3 hours before reaching the vaccination station, Bender said. They said, quote, when they got there, the trio rolled down their windows and hung their arms out so a nurse could swab and vaccinate them. Afterward, they received slips of paper certifying their vaccination with the Moderna vaccine, and they were directed to wait in another line for 15 minutes to ensure that none experienced an adverse reaction. Quote, the shot did not hurt at all, Bender said. Bud Fierlo, a public relations executive, also heard about the event through word of mouth. A friend told his wife, who ordered me over to take advantage of it. Fierlo said by phone on Friday during his nearly 5-hour wait to get the vaccine. Quote, she knows that I'm signed up for some time in March or April, but I'm happy to have it today. The sooner the better. End quote. DHEC not only essentially did not advertise the vaccination clinic in advance, its interim public health director did not mention it in Friday when asked directly why the agency had not yet held mass vaccination events at places like the state fairgrounds. Renwick said in an email Saturday that DHEC had not publicly advertised the event for fear it would cause unscheduled people to show up at the site and wait in lines for hours, only to be told that there were no more doses available. Quote, she said, quote, we've seen that type of situation play out in other states in recent weeks, and the goal was to avoid that scenario here in South Carolina. We're happy that 600 people received the shots yesterday and we'll use that pilot clinic as a model for logistical improvements for when mass vaccination clinics can be held based on ample supply of vaccine. End quote. Last Sunday, the White House Coronavirus Task Force released a statement about released a report about the situation here in South Carolina. That report said, quote, South Carolina is in the red zone for cases, indicating 101 or more per cases per 100,000 population, with the 12th highest rate in the country. South Carolina is in the red zone for test positivity, indicating a rate at or above 10.1%, with the ninth highest rate in the country. The report also reportedly provides some recommendations. We're going to have more reporting on that White House Coronavirus Task Force report tomorrow, but I will make sure to link that in the description of this episode. Earlier today, the nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, spoke with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press about the coronavirus and the vaccine rollout and some of the logistical problems that we're having. Here's part of that interview.
So let me start with this plain up the vaccine question, which is, there was this announcement. President-elect Biden calls for releasing all of the stockpile. The Trump administration agrees, and all of a sudden there's no stockpile. Was this a miscommunication? Was this a bigger error? What is the explanation here?
You know, I'm not exactly sure, Chuck, but I tried and I think successfully sorted that out. I had a conversation with General Perna last night and again this morning. And I think there was just a misunderstanding. In the beginning, when it wasn't quite clear about what the cadence, as he calls it, of the rolling out of doses would be, there was a lot of caution. So they wanted to make sure that everyone who got a first dose got a second dose on time. So when doses were released, an equal amount was kept back to make sure that if there was any glitches in the supply flow, that the people who got their first doses would clearly get their second doses. After a couple of cycles, when it became clear that the cadence of the flow of doses was really going to be consistent and reliable, the decision was made, instead of just giving enough for the first dose and holding back for the second dose, that as soon as they got the doses available, they would give it, because now they would have confidence that the next amount they would get, they'd have enough at least to give everybody the second dose, and then some to give the first dose.
More than 396,000 U.S. citizens are dead from the coronavirus, and more than 23.9 million infections have been reported. As we are barreling toward 400,000 coronavirus deaths here in the United States as a nation, health experts are saying that the Trump administration has, quote, blood on its hands, end quote. The incoming CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Lewinsky, said the U.S. can expect to reach 500,000 coronavirus deaths by mid-February. It's going to be a long time before we come out of this, but we must improve before things get better. Stay with us. Today, NBC News reported that President Trump is retaining overwhelming support from Republicans even after the deadly domestic terrorist attack that occurred at the Capitol on Wednesday, January 6th. According to 538.com, in the wake of the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol, public opinion is soaring quickly on President Trump as he enters the final days of his administration. Not only do a majority of Americans blame him for the riot at the Capitol and favor him removing from office, but his job approval rating has fallen faster in recent days than at any other point in his presidency. End quote. Today, Democratic Senate Majority Leader Designate Chuck Schumer made this statement about those who invaded the Capitol.
Ahead of the concern for possible future attacks, and with the law on our side, we are to say that these insurrectionists, many of whom are known to be at large, should not be able to hop on a flight. We are here today because the people, the insurrectionists who breached the U.S. Capitol fall under the definition of threats to the homeland and should be immediately added to the TSA no-fly list. Any of those who are inside the Capitol should not be able to fly and should be placed on the no-fly list. We are calling on the authorities, FBI, TSA, Department of Homeland Security, to put them on the no-fly list immediately.
Once again, that was Democratic Senate Majority Leader Designate Chuck Schumer calling for the insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol on January 6th to be put on the no-fly list. That in part is especially because that we know that most of them traveled to D.C. to be there for that rally and insurrection. Reportedly, the FAA has already taken steps when it comes down to cracking down on rowdy passengers aboard airplanes. Today has been mostly peaceful when it comes to the expected armed protests at state capitals. Today, the Washington Post reported about a 22-year-old man in D.C. who was just arrested. Quote, a 22-year-old Virginia man whose Facebook page features a photo from the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol was arrested Sunday near the Capitol with 3 high-capacity magazines, 37 rounds of unregistered ammunition, and a Glock 22 firearm. The arrest of Guy Berry, of Gordonsville, Virginia, was reported by D.C. police. Berry's aunt confirmed to the Washington Post that he is the same person as the one with the Facebook page. She said she received a voicemail from Berry after his arrest. The aunt, who spoke not to be identified for privacy reasons, said Berry was not at the Capitol during the riot because she saw him that day, but he often voiced pro-Trump sentiments. She said she and Berry disagreed over politics and his frequent carrying of gun. Quote, I kept telling him black men can't walk around with guns on his hip, but he didn't believe me. But he doesn't believe me. End quote, she said. Police say Berry was walking just after midnight on 200 block of Massachusetts Avenue NE with a firearm, clearly visible in a holster. He was stopped near a police checkpoint, and officers concluded he was not permitted to carry a handgun in the district. They then discovered he was in possession of the magazines and ammunition and was placed under arrest, police said. End quote. Also today, Wayne Davis at NPR reports that Lowe's Hotels will no longer allow fundraising for disgraced Republican Senator Josh Hawley. The fundraiser was supposed to be scheduled for February, but that has now been canceled for him. Senator Hawley, of course, has been criticized for his objection to the Electoral College votes, even after the insurrection transpired at the Capitol on Wednesday. The company put out a statement saying, quote, we are horrified and opposed to the events at the Capitol and all who supported and incited the actions. In light of those events and for the safety of our guests and team members, we have informed the host of the February fundraiser that it will no longer be held. End quote. Just remarkable news as this story continues to develop. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Jeremiah Patterson Show. Please make sure to share this episode with your family and friends. Have a great day, wear your mask, and I'll see you tomorrow.